Hello and welcome to my channel. In this lecture we'll continue our discussion about the spinal cord. So let's start. We talked about the gray matter of the spinal cord. Now it's the turn of the white matter of the spinal cord. As I told you before, it's at the periphery, not at the center, and divided into funiculi: posterior funiculus, lateral funiculus, and anterior funiculus. It has short and long tracts. Of the short tracts, we have what's so-called the fasciculus proprius. You should find it outside here at the margin. Fasciculus proprius connects the different segments of the spinal cord to coordinate the actions of the different segments, like in walking, for example. It's the actions of association neurons among the spinal cord neurons, and it's around the gray matter, ascend and descend for a few segments. It's the first to get myelinated, so it's the earliest movements of the newborns. And also coordinate the function of different regions or segments of the spinal cord, like what we have in walking and running. Another short tract is the septomarginal and comma shape. These are between the gracile and cuneate tracts at the dorsum. They connect both, associate both the gracile and cuneate tracts. There is also the Lissauer's tract. This is the Lissauer's tract. It's in the pain and temperature pathway, fibers ascending and descending multiple segment levels for the modulation of pain. The long tracts, it's many, of course. We have ascending and descending tracts. Few of the ascending tracts, the ascending tracts, they carry sensory information entering the spinal cord from peripheral receptors. Different kinds of receptors like touch and pain and temperature receptors. It's conducted through series of neurons. This is how sensation develops. Sensory modalities vary between pain, temperature, tactile, and proprioceptive inputs. The first order neuron for all sensations is the dorsal root ganglion, and the third order neuron for all sensations is the contralateral posterolateral ventral nucleus of the thalamus. They differ in sensations pathways, differ in their second order neuron. The second order neuron for pain and temperature, for example, is the substantia gelatinosa of Rolando. For simple touch is the main sensory nucleus, or the nucleus proprius. The efferents of these neurons, they cross in the spinal cord, as we will see, for example, in the anterolateral system of sensation. The second order neuron for proprioception and deep sensations lie in the medulla oblongata. They are the gracile and cuneate nuclei, and fibers cross in the medulla as the internal arcuate fibers, as we saw in the the lecture about the medulla oblongata. Fibers of the spinal cord, they vary between thin, below 5 microns, and they are of slow conductions, like those for pain and temperature. Medium, 10 microns for moderate speed, for touch, for example, and thick and faster, of high speed of conduction, for proprioception and deep sensations. Proprioception, we talked about it before. It's the sense of position, vibration, and passive movements of muscles, joints, ligaments, and fascia. Two somatosensory pathways ascend in the spinal cord. the anterolateral pathway for pain, temperature, and croup touch, and the posterior column medial lemniscal pathway for discriminative touch, vibration, and conscious proprioception. These are the two main sensory pathways that ascend in the spinal cord. The anterolateral pathways include the spinothalamic, the spino-reticular, and spino-mesencephalic tracts. Spinothalamic, spino-reticular, and spino-mesencephalic tract. This is here the course of the spinothalamic tract. The first order neuron, as we studied before, it's the dorsal root ganglion. Axons enter the spinal cord through the dorsal horn, as you can see here. And then some axons synapse immediately on cells of second order neuron, and some ascend or descend few levels as Lissauer's tract. This is the Lissauer's tract before synapsing on cells of the second order neuron. This is to involve multiple segments in pain sensation. The axons of the second order neuron now, they cross in the anterior commissure, anterior to the central canal of the spinal cord, to the opposite side and ascend as the lateral or anterolateral spinothalamic tract, as you can see here. This is in the spinal cord, this is in the medulla, and here in the pons. And it forms the spinal lemniscus as it goes up in the brainstem to the posterolateral ventral nucleus of the thalamus, which is the third order neuron, and then to the somatosensory cortex. Now the spino-reticular, the same beginning, means it begins as the Lissauer's tract, but the second order neuron is the reticular formation of brainstem to convey emotional and arousal aspects of pain. Spino-mesencephalic tract, mesencephalon means the midbrain, so expect that it ends in the midbrain, projects to the periaqueductal gray of the midbrain, and the superior colliculi in the midbrain as the spinotectal. It's for central modulation of pain. So we have the spinothalamic, the spino-reticular, and the spino-mesencephalic tracts. The posterior column medial lemniscal pathway, the first order neuron is the dorsal root ganglion, as we agreed upon previously, and axons enter the spinal cord through the dorsal horn and ascend as gracile. This is from the lower limb or lower half of the body, and the cuneate starts to form once the fibers from the upper limb join the gracile to form the cuneate tract lateral to it for the upper limb and the neck. Now these tracts ascend in the dorsum of the spinal cord ipsilaterally, and to synapse in the medulla, caudal medulla at the gracile and cuneate nuclei. We saw these in sections of the medulla. Axons then cross to form the internal arcuate fibers. Also we saw that in sections of the medulla to form the medial lemniscus, which ascends adjacent to the MLF near the middle. The medial lemniscus ascends through the brainstem. It becomes transversely, remember, in the pons, and then synapses at the third order neuron, which is the posterolateral ventral nucleus of the thalamus. Now axons of the third order neurons ascend in the posterior limb of the internal capsule, as we studied before in horizontal sections of the brain, to somatosensory cortex. So this is the posterior column medial lemniscus pathway. It's for fine touch and proprioception from the lower half of the body by gracile tract and the upper half of the body by cuneate tract, and they both synapse on gracile and cuneate nuclei in the medulla, and form fibers that cross to the opposite side as the internal arcuate fibers and ascend as medial lemniscus to the third order neuron, which is the opposite posterolateral ventral nucleus of the thalamus. I hope you got the maximum benefit from this lecture, and thank you very much for watching.